our final destination is not just women. We want to be in sports with men as well. But right now, the proof is in the pudding. People want women's sports. They're watching more and more of it.
Welcome to Future of Fandom, the podcast where leagues, teams, and federations learn how to turn passive viewers into loyal superfans through gamification, loyalty, and next-gen engagement. Let's build what's next together.
Brian Lawlor, thank you for joining us on Future of Fandom. I'm here. Brian, for those folks in the audience that don't know much about you or the work that you're doing with Scripps, especially because it's quite an international audience, maybe a little bit of background on yourself and what the work you're doing would be awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Um, Scripps is a 150-year-old media company, so we have been around for a long time, in and out of a lot of the different media in the United States. We started some of the first newspapers in America, started some of the first radio stations, television stations. Internationally, people may know probably the biggest brand to come out of our company was HGTV, which we founded back in the 80s, I think. And then we got our hands on the Food Network, and we put those together, and those became really global lifestyle brands. But, we own a couple of networks, including a network called ION in the United States, and it is a fully distributed national network. And then we also own 60 plus local television stations in the United States. And so over the last couple of years, as we looked at sort of the trends inside of sports, our local television stations are typically affiliated with networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox. They have a lot of sports, but in many markets, we own a second TV station where we may do more local news or more local programming. And so, a couple of years ago, we sort of just stepped back and looked at some of the trends inside of sports. We saw that our regional sports network business in the U.S. had changed a lot, and that the distribution of many of those local channels with the local sports teams, which used to, reach maybe 80% of all the households in every one of their markets, reaches 40 or 50%. And so we saw a lot of erosion there, a lot of value destruction there. And then on the national scale, we own ION, as I mentioned. We had purchased that back during the pandemic, and it has been programmed by prior owners and initially by us, sort of exclusively with a lot of U.S.-based dramas. So the NCIS and Law and Order franchises, in addition, like Chicago Fire and shows like that, and those have worked very well. But we also could, see some of the trends of that more and more the one genre that was really growing an audience, bringing an audience together, allowing people to watch live with sports. And so we spent a couple of months on a national and a local level exploring the importance of sports and the future of sports rights, the cost of sports rights, and ultimately decided a little over 3 years ago that we saw an opportunity with the assets that we owned, that we could solve a problem for teams and leagues, which was that, between streaming and reduction in cord cutting, less people paying for cable and satellite, there are less teams connecting with their fans. And so we were able to, being an over-the-air broadcast network, in local markets and in our national markets, we're distributed everywhere. We're on cable, we're on satellite, we have streaming channels. And so we were able to offer a solution to a lot of teams that were able to put their games back in front of fans again. And we've had a lot of success there in the last couple of years.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, during the pandemic, especially me and my wife were spent a lot of time on HGTV, as did most folks at the time, I believe. But we've all, we all knew those as Discovery. I knew that Discovery and Scripps had merged. But the sports strategy is relatively new, and to a certain extent, I'd love to understand, when everyone else is going streaming, walled gardens, closed loops, you're sort of putting the content everywhere. How does it feel? Like, I'd actually be curious to see if you have started seeing the results of that, why the difference in strategy. I think you guys have, it's fair to say, been one of the disruptors in the last couple of years, especially with the local rights model, with the RSN disruption, right? That has happened. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think, simply put, we believe that, fans and deserve to be able to see their local games. And while, teams are independently owned, they're really community teams, right? Whether you're in Europe and the United States, I mean, it's the community that embraces them. And, we believe that the fans deserve to be able to see the games of, their local teams. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty, certainly on a local level, about streaming and can it be scaled. But we, as teams, and we have 4 teams that we partner with in the NHL, and, in each case, they were coming off of deals with a RSN, where they'd gone from reaching 80% of their fans to 30, 40% of their fans. And so not only did that affect, television viewership and sponsorship, but it also resulted in less people attending games, less merchandise sales. And so we were able to come in and say, hey, look, you could go to streaming and people could pay, whatever, but those are the same folks who have been, disconnected for, you're missing a whole large portion of your fan base. And we have a solution to that. And, we're not an either or, we're actually both. When we come in and acquire the rights, we are putting them on over the air television. So if you just have an antenna and you plug in a TV, plug it into your TV, you'll be able to get our games. But we also have distribution deals with the cable companies, the satellite companies, and in partnership with the team, with our NHL teams, we've stood up a streaming platform as well. And so if streamers want to stream, we've got a platform for it, and all of our games are available there. If somebody can't afford cable or satellite and they just have an antenna, we're able to be available there. So I think the appeal that these games could be available to anyone on any platform, on any device, and for free in some cases was very appealing to the ownership, and that has proven out to be the case. And every one of the 3 teams that we do all the production distribution on, we've more than doubled their ratings, in some cases tripled their ratings. We've also stood up a complementary streaming business that's profitable. And, I think we've been able to deliver on the proposition that more fans have been able to see the games, and you're building fandom and young kids now, that will want to go to games and buy jerseys. The good news is a couple of years in, our thesis has proven out, and we have more and more teams looking to make a move to partner with either our company or others for that mass distribution. Reach matters, right? And if you can't be in front of your fans, then what you're doing on the pitch or on the ice or on the field is irrelevant.
No, I mean, and to be honest with you, I mean that sounds perfect because you saw that even the NBA in their national market rights prioritize reach with the likes of NBC over cable, and so I'm curious to hear more about like if there's anything in the data that you can share that tells you the difference between how fans are engaging on over the air versus on streaming. Are there any differences that you're seeing? I have tons of follow-ups question, even from a commercial standpoint, if there is any data that is proving out to the teams in terms of what the additional reach is bringing for them in terms of the downstream revenue streams that exist. But like, yeah, just to start with, like, because our podcast is the future of fandom and we're so focused on the fan experience, what are you seeing any differences in how fans consume the content on over the air versus streaming?
I don't think we're seeing differences in how they're consuming it. We're just seeing differences in who's consuming it on what platforms. And so typically it's a little bit of a younger audience that is watching on streaming, and it's people who have already cut the cord. And the reality is they're never going to pay for cable or satellite. Some may have an antenna, others don't. But I think we see a lot of engagement. In many cases, it could be 20 or 30% of our overall audience is lifted by having streaming as a complement. Still, we get significantly bigger audiences on the broadcast side, on the linear side. But, you're talking about live local sports or live national sports. And so, I think there's very little difference in how people are consuming it. We're seeing a lot of consumption live on the over-the-air broadcast, and we're seeing a lot of consumption live on the streaming. We do make all of our games available for replay on the streaming, but 95% of the viewing and consumption happens live.
I can obviously attest to the fact that, after the fact, you're really just sticking to highlights. And even there, most of those highlights these days are being consumed on social media. They're pushed down to you rather than you going and seeking them out per se. That's definitely a change in behavior that we have seen across all our partnerships where there isn't as much interest in fans going and saying, let me look at the highlight. I mean, maybe the Super Bowl, maybe some marquee events, but day in and day out, when you have so much content every day throughout the year, I definitely don't see that push versus pull argument is definitely moving in the favor of social media and pushing highlights down to the users.
I do it myself. There's a game I want to watch, but I'm traveling or not available. I'll DVR it. And then when I get home, I ultimately already know who won, and I never go back and watch the whole game. I'll go back and through, clips and mostly on social or other platforms, sort of snack it, in a much smaller consumption habit and get ready for the next game.
Just coming back to, so one of the things that I'm very curious about, you mentioned that more and more teams are coming to you now. Your thesis in the last couple of years has sort of proven out. And especially with what's happening in the past few weeks with Main Street Sports Group and stuff. Is there anything in the data that's telling you, or maybe the data has to be shared by the team owners, where they are starting to see the benefits of that additional reach, especially with younger audiences, bearing fruit in terms of their team operations or event-based operations, ticketing, merchandising, etc.?
Yeah, look, we have a lot of conversations with our teams. We're very lucky that the teams we our partners with are very successful. I think, we've got the last, 5 Stanley Cup champions. So, we're very lucky that they're already very popular teams. They have loyal followings. But the visibility, they talk about the fact that, having the visibility everywhere is really, you know, um, helping to breed the next generation of sports fans to them. I think the one tangible thing, many of our teams already sold out their arena, for several years. Their merch very high. But I think one of the things that's very telling is in several of these markets, we hear that the youth sport, youth hockey in Florida or in Las Vegas is exploding. And I think that's representative of the fact that these kids can see the games. They're finding heroes and players they want to follow. They're going out and buy their merch and they want to be like them. And so, in 3 markets there, and including in Salt Lake, but in Las Vegas and in Tampa and in Miami, warm weather climates, they're some of the fastest growing in youth hockey in the United States. And it's because of the visibility that all of the games for their local teams are available, and kids are starting to migrate from wanting to play baseball, wanting to play basketball or soccer. Now they want to play hockey. And it has to do with the fact that they can watch the games and be fans on a consistent basis.
That's awesome. That actually is a really interesting data point. From the perspective of economics, though, I mean obviously surely has been like the tug of war for the past 5 years, right? Guaranteed money coming from streamers and pay TV providers versus more reach and long, like I wouldn't call it longer term, but you know, a little bit more. You have to trust and have faith. How do those conversations go for you in terms of, I suppose data is it, the proof is in the pudding at this point in time, but it's still a big hole to fill for these teams with the local RSNs model that has been in place for the last few decades.
Yeah, and sort of as I said at the beginning, we sort of have a two-tier strategy. We have a national strategy with a national channel that's fully distributed, and then we have the local. So there's sort of 2 ways to sort of answer that. On a national level, our first contract with the WNBA, the Women's Basketball League, just expired at the end of last season, and we were, it came at the time when the NBA was renewing their rights, and you had everyone sort of at the table looking to acquire, those rights, but they protected the Friday night on Ion. And they told us that there were streamers that really liked our package. We have an exclusive national distribution on Friday nights. Up to this point, we've had every game available on Friday night, and we made one a national game and then regionalized the rest. And, the league told us from the beginning, like, we're going to try the best we can to protect the Friday night package, but we know that there's others. And when it was all said and done, we did a new long-term deal with them. But they did say, like, there was some aggressive pursuit of those Friday night rights, but it was because of our reach, our over the air. They already have a deal with some streamers like Amazon. They have a deal, with some national networks. But the idea of having a nationally distributed, consistent franchise night, Friday nights, national doubleheader, national studio shows was really appealing to them. Could they have gotten more money for those rights? probably. But, it's not obviously what we bid and were successful with was significant, but they probably could have done, gotten more had they pushed one of the streamers. But the reality was our reach was so important for every household in America. Be able to get a doubleheader on Friday nights on every platform, including streaming, was a big deal for them. So, that was certainly the case on national. On the local, the same thing. I think that, the economics are changing. The RSNs were built, probably 80% of the revenue came from distribution revenue and 20% from ad sales. Our model's completely the opposite. We have a smaller base of distribution revenue, but our model is really built on reach, doubling, tripling the audience, being able to go back and increase the value of our sponsorship deals and advertisers, and that's turned out to work pretty well. I mean, look, some sports the economics are significantly higher than others. And so, I think we have been successful with the NHL to this point with 4 teams, with the women's soccer league, the NWSL, WNBA. We have teams representing all of them. I expect sooner than later we'll have, a couple of deals in the NBA, as long as they don't go to a national distributed deal. So there are sports where the economics work, and there's still sports where, the value of the distribution, even at a reduced level, is significant. So, but we've been able to, make it work, and I think our teams are very happy. They're getting a rights fee from us that we're able to monetize through mostly advertising, and it's a profitable venture for us, and I think it's turned out to be a very good venture for them as well.
And is the upside shared between you guys from a sponsorship revenue perspective, or it's more upfront?
It's more upfront, but there are typically triggers that, share in some level of success.
Yeah, and as we discussed before, a lot of the revenue, the impact from a wider reach, you obviously accrues to the league, but that shows up separately through their merch and ticketing and stuff like that. Very good. In terms of, you mentioned that the league with the partnership with the WNBA, you have actually overemphasized on women's sports, I would say, right? Like in terms of NWSL, the WNBA, at partnership with Athlos. What are you seeing? I mean, you might be in the best position to actually talk about the differences between how audiences consume women's sports versus men's sports. I'm not even talking about gender-based differences, just in general, like how men consume men's sports versus women's sports, vice versa, how women consume women's sports versus men's sports.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Look, I'll step back a couple years ago, and after we acquired Ion, we took about 6 months to just look at Ion as a network, and as I said, it was very much focused on, dramas and procedurals, and we just said, we were very successful. It was a profitable programming strategy, but we said, well, let's look at, should we be putting news on Ion? Should we put sports on Ion? Should we put entertainment or originals on Ion? And so we spent probably 6 months inside the company going down all those different paths, and ultimately, came back and just said, the business case for sports was really compelling. We have ESPN, sort of the biggest brand in sports in the US, only reaches about 60 or 65% of the households as an over-the-air broadcast network. And yet we have this network that's on every cable, every satellite, every streaming, right? So we are fully distributed. And, that was, certainly very compelling. And so, we ultimately saw that the product we had would be appealing to leagues and teams seeking outreach. Well, then, as we started looking at, where do we think we could solve a problem? What leagues were struggling with reach? What rights were going to become available? What would they cost? One of the things that we presented to our senior leadership team after our couple months of research, and then ultimately with the board was, every time there's a women's sporting event on television in the United States, the audience is bigger than it was a year ago. And that's not just basketball, it was soccer, it was gymnastics, it was women's volleyball. And so there was just an increasing interest in these women's sports. But as we told the board, it was really hard to be a women's sports fan in America because there was just no consistency, And so if you were interested in women's college basketball, you could watch Tuesday at 7. The next game might be Thursday at midnight. There might be a Sunday at noon, and they were all different teams. You couldn't really follow a team. And so, we ultimately said that we saw a lot of opportunity where that we thought there would be a lot of growth in women's sports, and we thought that, we could come in and give them a nationally distributed, consistent, every week, same time, which is ultimately what we built for women's soccer and basketball, a consistent night with double headers and studio shows and analysis. And we just made it easy to find the games and the teams. And so that really was, the value proposition. And the WNBA was the first one we got in. We were there a year and stood up a national platform while Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and Cameron Brink, all those guys were still in college. And so, I would love to tell you we predicted the explosion of them. We didn't, but we saw the growth and we saw the interest, and which was why we built it. And it turns out, if you build it, they will come. Well, there was so much interest in those players when they left college, came to the WNBA, and we were ready, and we were able to, in the first season, have 9 nationally distributed Indiana Fever games. And, we were pulling 2 million viewers for a women's WNBA game. And so our timing was perfect. And then Ion, which had never been known for sports, suddenly was known as a place where you could find professional women's sports. And then we added the NWSL. And as you said, Athlos, the big women's track event. We just recently, there's a new professional cheerleading league. Cheer is going to be an Olympic sport in a couple of years. And so we've partnered with them. We're working with the PWHL in distribution of some of their games, as well as Major League Volleyball. So, we have found that our timing was great. Our belief that people were really interested in women's sports was spot on. And because we're able to bring an audience, we're seeing significant advertising and sponsor dollars that are chasing women's sports and want to be associated with our broadcast. So our final destination is not just women. We want to be in sports with men as well. But right now, the proof is in the pudding. People want women's sports. They're watching more and more of it. They want to, we get notes all the times from mom and dads talking about their girls and, how if they Friday night, like they don't want to go out. They want to stay home and, watch their favorite WNBA players. So I think we had a really good strategy and we got a little lucky, if I'm being
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. That's awesome. 2 questions actually. What was the bump between the 2 years before Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and after?
Oh, it was the league doubled and any game with Caitlin tripled or quadrupled prior year. So, I mean, it is amazing, but she's an incredible draw.
Yeah, that's like lightning in a bottle. Yeah.
This year she was hurt most of the season. We had 8 Indiana Fever games. She played in 1. And the Indiana Fever are very popular. So when they play,
Yeah, Sophie Cunningham has become a big draw as well. Yeah.
right, and Boston and all those guys. So, they've been up, probably 30% higher in Indiana Fever. But then when Caitlin plays, like added 500,000 viewers.
That's insane. No wonder they're in the collective bargaining agreement right now. And then I think another question that I wanted to ask was, do you have any numbers in terms of how much of the audience watching women's sports is male versus female?
Yeah, this year was a big shift. With the growth that has happened over the last couple of years, it's almost been all male. And so I think that was, if you go back 4 or 5 years ago and you asked a man in America about WNBA, 9 out of 10 would be like, why would I ever waste my time? And they believed that it was an inferior game. And then all of a sudden, Caitlin and, Paige and um, Angel and all these players came into the league and they started watching games and they went, whoa, it's a different game than the men's game, but it's not inferior. The men's game, 80% of the men's game is played above the rim. None of the women's game is played above the rim, right? So it's all better shooting and passing and all. But, then there was a little tension, a little competitiveness. It's a physical game. And men watched it and they said, this is actually really good. And so over the last couple of years, the majority of the growth has been on the men's side. And for us, Ion's a very female skewing network. It's about 50-50 men to women right now. So it's been, the interest continues to grow.
But to be honest with you, the thesis of women's sports versus men's sports has been proven out in other sports, right? Like women's tennis versus men's tennis. I mean, women's tennis is at different points in time as popular as men's tennis in some situations. And you see that, right? Like one is a power game, one's more of a strategy and tactic game, and one is more touch and feel. The other one is more raw power and aggression. I feel like there is an audience for both. And then women's soccer, US women's soccer team is more popular than the men's soccer team. And right.
That's true. Yes.
And so the fact that you're providing that predictability, as you said, and just consistency as a fan definitely makes sense. One question that we have, and live like obviously we deal a lot with brand loyalty, stickiness, retention. When you're putting your content everywhere, how do you think about loyalty, brand loyalty as a concept? Like, do you ever think do you focus on fan experience at all, or it's more about distribution?
It's both. I mean, we start with distribution as the most significant differentiator for us. Let's put the live games in front of everyone on every platform possible. So that's first and foremost. But then beyond that, the stickiness is using the platform for its unique capabilities and the way people want to consume it. First and foremost, people on whatever device, they want to watch the games live. And so that's sort of the price of admission. We have to be there and we have to do it, and it has to be a really good broadcast. And people prefer traditional broadcasts for the most part. That said, then we have streaming platforms that allow us to maybe offer alternative play-by-play or different technology or different view. And so we've experimented with some of that. And then cut downs and social clips and additional content around players, teams, rivalries. So I think we use every platform for the stickiness based on how people consume content on that platform. But the price of admission has to be a good, clean live broadcast of every game.
And just adding on to that, in terms of your playbooks or your strategies for local fandom versus national fandom, how does that differ?
Doesn't differ at all. At the end of the day, we believe that every fan deserves to be able to see any game they want, and we let them pick the platform and the device they want to use. Our goal is to get the games as distributed as possible.
And in terms of shoulder programming or creating conversation, I mean, obviously, as you said before, right? A lot of the local sports are community sports, so there's a lot of conversation, chatter, discussion. Monday morning water cooler type of things that might happen in that sense. A lot of these sports are maybe family oriented, like families are watching together. Are you leaning into that at all, or is that something that's more on your roadmap?
No, I think, we've leaned into it to this point with the goal of enhancing the broadcast experience and educating fans. And so what we've done is pregame shows, postgame shows, intermission. We have a whole department within our team that goes out and does profiles on the players or the teams. So there's storytelling. It's just I'm sitting here watching the Olympics the last couple of days, right? And before a skier or a speed skater skates, they do these profiles, and suddenly you become a fan of somebody you never heard of 2 weeks ago, and then you're rooting for them because you sort of know their story. So we do a lot of effort flying all over the country to sit down with players and learn their story and tell their story. I got to tell you, like these women athletes, especially, their stories have been rarely told, and they're fascinating. So many of the men in the NHL or the NBA, I mean, sort of they've always been in the limelight, but many of the women athletes, their story is very limited to a small group, and so for us to be able to give that national exposure, I mean, I've watched some of these stories, and I'm like, I am a fan of hers for life now. I love who she is. I love what she stands for. It's sort of fun. So I feel like I'm learning as much, and I know our viewers are as well. But I feel like we have that obligation. We've made a commitment that we want to grow women's sports, and part of that is take these incredible athletes who are amazing women, powerful, strong, incredible athletes, and give them more visibility so that others can be as excited about them as we have become.
No, I mean, the only other place where I can probably say, as a fan, I've experienced that level of exposure to new athletes is, when what NBC does with the Olympics, right? Like, there's these athletes that no one has ever heard of, and I'm like, oh my god, her story is amazing. Whether it's Lindsey Vonn, whether it's Eileen Gu, whether it's Michaela Schifrin, I mean, there's so much background there. Summer Olympics has their own athletes, but that's really the only time. Once in 4 years is where the sort of the light was shown on them, and the fact that you're doing it week over week is obviously cultivating a whole new set of fans. Are there certain strategies that you think, given your experience and how you see fandom shifting, are there certain strategies, like if you had the chance to speak to team owners or league administrators, some tricks that they might be missing out on?
I think what I would tell them is it doesn't have to be either or. And by that, what I mean is their option isn't broadcast or streaming. It can be both. And we've proven that. And we think that that's the most effective. When we have the rights to one of our NHL teams, if you're home on a Tuesday night and there's a game on and you're able to throw it on the TV, that's a great experience. But if on Thursday night your kid has soccer practice or your kid has, you know, whatever practice and you have to sit, in your car for an hour and a half while your kid's inside practicing or outside practicing, now you can, watch on your phone and you can watch the first period and a half live. Now you're completely into the game. Say it's a tie game or a close game. Now you're driving home. You probably put the game on the radio and then you walk in the house and you put the game on the third period or the fourth quarter on the TV. And so we think that is a unbelievable customer proposition to be everywhere. It doesn't have to be you're either doing a broadcast deal or a streaming deal. We think the more you can put those two together and make the games available on both platforms, that's when the fans really win.
Are you seeing a lot of are you seeing anything in the data that tells you that especially in terms of the streaming audience, how many of the streaming audiences are coming direct to you versus through a like a virtual MVPD?
Virtual MVPD probably still, well, in the US, a virtual MVPD, we sort of look at like that's a linear consumer, right? And so if somebody watches on YouTube TV, we actually get linear ratings for that, and it gets bundled into our television ratings. Somebody who comes through like Roku or a platform like that, again, it's, probably like for the WNBA or the NWSL, it's been between 20 and 30% of the audience is coming through a streaming platform, an Amazon, like a Fire Stick, right, or a Samsung TV or, an Apple TV or something like that. So about 20 to 30% lift, which is complementary to what we're providing on the broadcast.
That's awesome. I have obviously asked you a lot of questions. There are some rapid fire questions that we ask all of our guests. I'd love to ask you those as well. What's a platform that you can't live without right now? And something that you use every day.
I still use TikTok every day
You do. Interesting.
because to the point we were just talking about learning new things about players, like especially this week, the amount of content that I am consuming from behind the scenes at the Olympics, the teams arriving, them walking into their, Olympic Village for the first time, the foods they're eating, the rooms they're sleeping in. I find it fascinating. And so it enhances my sports engagement by this other content. I'm not watching games. If there's a good fight or something like that, I'll consume that. But at the end of the day, I'm learning more about the athlete experience through that platform, and I find it really fascinating.
And is most of the content? I'm not on TikTok at all, so I'm more curious. Is most of that content coming from like NBC's TikTok channel, or is it coming from creators that have been given access?
Most of the time, it's coming from the athletes themselves.
Athletes themselves. Fair enough. Yeah. And okay, that's actually perfectly leads me to the next question. Who is there one athlete or few athletes that you think are really nailing digital engagement or like a direct to consumer experience with their fans?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you're familiar with the Stud Buds. The Stud Buds are 2 WNBA players.
Oh
They
no, no, no!
both
I know Starbucks. That's right. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
they both got the pink hair.
Yes, yes,
And
that's right.
Courtney and Natisha, they play for Minnesota Lynx, but they have created an incredible social following. Not only are they talking about the WNBA, and every WNBA player wants to talk to them. They're showing up at the All-Star game and all, and creating content. But they were at the NWSL championship game when I was there, so they're following other sports, and female athletes from every sport want to engage with them. It's fascinating, and they're authentic and real and fun, and I think that's they epitomize the way to really do, digital engagement well.
I love that answer. That's not an answer that I would not have known that. So that's perfect. Thank you for educating me. Last question. What's one metric that you're obsessed with right now?
That's such an interesting question because there's a lot of changes happening inside of the metrics around sports. And so, Nielsen this year has started to bring in big data and, out of home viewing. And so suddenly, for every sporting event, we're seeing record audiences, but those are also linear audiences. And then, as we talked about on the streaming platforms, you have, you don't get the same data, you get different data. You get hours of viewing, and then Netflix is sort of, minutes of viewing, right? And I think there's not a single thing I'm watching. I'm watching all of it because I think it's sort of messy right now, and I do think it's evolving, but I don't love the fact that you have linear audiences and then streaming audiences, and they're different. Hours of viewing versus, being able to tell me exactly how many 25, 54-year-olds are. I look forward to the point where you can get credit for everything, and sort of, broadcasters in America are only getting credit for the linear, but also, as I said, we're delivering a third more audience on streaming, but those are apples and oranges. I look forward to when the industry is able to come together, agree on how to merge those two so that, the owners of rights can actually be able to monetize it and get credit for all of the different data that's available.
With that, I think thank you, Brian, for coming on the
My
podcast. I think
pleasure.
you've given us a lot of nuggets here. Um, Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Future of Fandom. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow LiveLike on LinkedIn for more conversations with the people shaping what's next in the world of sports and media. Until next time, keep building for fans, not just users.